Ever wondered what to do when teams or departments are dysfunctional and there is harm in the organization? I am Dr. Frank Douglas, the host of the Antifragility Reframe podcast. And in this episode, we are going to explore issues of organizational dysfunction and how we repair such dysfunction in teams or departments. My guest today is Ms. Leah Brown. She's the founder of the Finder's Way. She focuses on repairing harm in organizations, and she will share with us some anecdotes of problems with which she has dealt. Ms. Brown, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It is great to be with you today.
Well, thank you indeed. And you have an accent, so tell us a little bit where you're from.
I have three passports. I was born in the United States, I grew up in the United Kingdom, and I have a lot of family in Barbados.
Well, I was born in Guyana and came to the United States at the age 20 and have been here ever since. So sometimes people, and I lived in Germany for many years. I am
Wow.
fluent in German. So sometimes people do wonder where my accent is from. But they usually can hear the Caribbean part of my accent. So tell me, uh, what are the types of challenges that you have faced in organizations as you've helped them to find their way?
Yes, well, I think the WayFinders Group is a multidisciplinary consultancy, which means we get very complex challenges to help resolve. And a few years back, I was asked to conduct a workplace mediation. I am an accredited mediator and I specialize in leadership, particularly boards. And I was asked to mediate between a young female employee, and she had raised a complaint of harassment against her line manager. And this had escalated, and eventually a grievance was raised. And it became clear that this mediation couldn't go ahead until the grievance was resolved. Now, fast forward, I know now that the line manager left the organization. But when I was first speaking with this employee, I obviously had pre-meetings with both of them before the mediation commenced. I asked her, what do you need? If there was an ideal outcome here, if there was anything that you could achieve, what would it be? And she said to me, I need someone to acknowledge that this has happened to me and that it continues to happen. Now, I don't need to give the perspective of the line manager for the purposes of this story because in terms of repairing the damage, I had to focus on the employee. Because when you have a situation where damage goes unacknowledged, where no one looks them in the eye and says, this should never have happened to you, or when a manager acts in a particular way and never gives a meaningful apology, just says if you don't like it, you can leave or I can leave, or doesn't involve that employee in the conversation as to what taking responsibility or accountability for what has transpired looks like, then there's absolutely no possible or conceivable way in which an organization might take steps to ensure that something like this doesn't happen again. Which means that cultures stay as they are. It means that leaders aren't encouraged to grow and change. And it means that employees continue to suffer. And I think the particular area of focus for me, as somebody who works in organizational repair, is to recognize where people are involved in processes that repeatedly strip them of agency. The first time, when an incident happens. The second time, by going through a process to try and get the organization to take accountability for what's happened and to address it. And then the third time, when the organization chooses or doesn't choose, as is usually the outcome, to do anything about it.
Let's look at this from the individual's perspective, the employee's perspective. And it was interesting. You immediately asked the employee what outcome they would like. And when we think about reframing, shifting perspectives, and particularly making sure that the stress, the challenge that you have, you come out from it stronger than before, you come out anti-fragile. One of the things we talk about is understanding the outcome. And what are your comments with respect to the outcome that she wanted? You actually did address it as you told us the incident, but I'd like you to talk a little bit more about the outcome when employees have a challenge.
Yeah, that's really interesting to me because as mediators, the one thing we actually don't do is start with the outcome. We work to separate the person from the problem to figure out what's important to them, how they've come to be in this situation, why they're still in this situation, to get enough supplementary information to be able to then say, okay, so with all that being said, what is the outcome here? But I think to answer your question, the outcome sought was an unachievable outcome. Because when an employee has to fight to get justice, and I don't mean big level justice, so there's no going to court, there's no verdict, nothing like that, but to just have an offense acknowledged. And if they're struggling to do that, it is very difficult to help them work towards any of the outcomes that they want because most survivors of institutional harm say, I want to ensure this doesn't happen to anyone else. If I can't fix it for me, if I can't make my situation better, how can I ensure that what this person did to me doesn't happen to anybody else? And it's a real challenge.
So is that then a reasonable outcome for that individual?
It can be, but one of the limitations of a mediation process is that in a workplace, the human resources or the people team brings in an independent mediator, the company pays for the mediation, and both individuals who are participating in that mediation come to the table. The outcome that that survivor of harm wants to experience can only be brought into play if the umbrella HR takes a recommendation from a process they're not in, because they're not in this mediation, and says, okay, well, I can see how that would be helpful in this situation, but do we really have any obligation to take an action here? To which the answer is usually no. So it's only in very unique situations, possibly when there are lots of processes that raise the same issue, that reveal a particular cultural challenge, where an organization is gathering data on a particular issue like this as a result of an independent review or some kind of scandal, where you'd have an opportunity to help an organization address the root of the problem, which is more often than not cultural. Thankfully, I'm not just a mediator, I'm also a restorative practitioner. So I don't just get brought in to do straight mediation. And so, yes, I regularly take that step with the organization to try and get a little bit of context before the mediation, because as I say, HR usually aren't party to it, to understand what's going on. How does this sit in the broader landscape? Are there any ongoing culture reviews going on? Are there any leadership challenges? Are there new leaders joining the business? What's the attrition rate like of the organization? Has this person, this line manager, ever been part of a mediation before? Have you ever had any allegations or any other issues escalated to you in relation to either of the participants in this mediation, it's helpful to know. I don't have to disclose that. It's just helpful to know. And so I think these are questions that we also explore with the participants, but you want to have as full a picture as possible on what the context is that you're walking into, because you're just seeing things through a snapshot of time. And so you're doing your best in a limited period of time to separate the person from the problem, to figure out what outcomes might you be able to help somebody reframe, but also help them not look, I know you love this phrase on your podcast, not look backwards, but focusing on how do we become stronger through this process so that we can move forwards. And I think that reframing in a way that people can articulate what forward momentum looks like for them, even though it might not be what they had in mind when they first came to the conversation at the start of the day, really helps them recognize what is achievable and what isn't.
So, as a mediator, you're trying to get both parties to reframe and
Absolutely.
really see, yeah, to see a different perspective. And I like, and I may have misstated your group. You're the founder of the WayFinders Group. I might have
That's right.
misstated, so let me correct it. And so you are really trying to have both parties uh, find their way, but also find a common way in which they can move forward and the department can move forward.
That's right. And ideally, when you're facilitating a process that helps people stay in the organization, that's when the real repair work
Mhm.
commences. Because what happens when the issue is resolved, so the conflict has gone away, but the damage lingers? What
Mhm.
do you do next to
Mhm.
rebuild relationships and deal with the relational side of the challenges that might be completely unconnected to the reasons that they were in the room in the first place? And I think a lot of that kind of transparency and a lot of that authenticity and vulnerability is very difficult to foster in a work environment when people lack psychological safety, or when people feel like what they say is going to be held against them, or when they feel like it doesn't matter, nobody's listening anyway. They just want to tick a box, or they just want to say that they've apologized, but they don't mean it. It doesn't really matter to them. And I think you can very quickly end up needing repair after a process has said case closed, no further action, and then leave that too long, so that actually the operational cost of fixing the lack of repair becomes more expensive than if you hadn't addressed the conflict at the outset.
So, in closing, in one or two sentences, what are the key things as a mediator uh, you would leave with the audience? Mhm.
I think this work has taught me that dysfunction doesn't respect professional boundaries, right? So if you have a situation where trust is broken down, it doesn't matter how great your policies are, you're going to have to find a different way to rebuild those relationships. And I think we've designed a blueprint that takes people through 4 stages of acknowledgement and apology and accountability and amends, which goes beyond mediation to help people focus on the underlying dynamics that hold repair at bay, so that people can have not just functional organizations, but thriving organizations that reflect why people were recruited in the first place, to get the most out of the institutional knowledge that people have, the values that they hold, and their commitment to the task at hand.